right. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah? All right. I might slow roll it for a minute just to let other people come in. But I know I only got 20 minutes. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Did I hear, are we taking questions? Has that been happening? Yeah? Maybe? All right. Gonna have to warm everybody up. All right, well listen, if you have questions and if there is a way to take questions, please do ask them. Because the way that I think about these things is, I know some stuff about this topic. You all are here to hopefully get something valuable out of what I know. I have some ideas based on working with the MadFest team about what that could be that I've packaged up for you today. But actually the most direct way and the most sure way for me to try to add some value and hopefully say something that you haven't heard before is for you to ask me questions. So please do take advantage of that if you have any that pop up. All right, so we are going to talk about the playbook for challenger brands. Let's start here. Why me? I've spent a lot of time with CMOs. So over the last 3.5 years with Rival, we're a marketing consultancy that's focused on understanding what challenger brands do differently to grow within categories that are being disrupted. I've interviewed about 120 CMOs. You can see a bunch of the logos up here. Previous to Rival, I was CMO of a fintech venture builder called 11FS, and I did about 30 episodes of the uncreatively named Fintech Marketing Podcast, interviewing CMOs in the banking and the fintech and the financial services world. And so basically, the last kind of 5 or 6 years of the interviews that I've done has come together into, of course, what I'm going to talk to you about today. And you will see on this logo list a bunch of the challenger brands that you recognize, that I'm going to talk about, that I know all of you are at this talk and also at this conference to hear from. But you'll also see a bunch of incumbent brands on here. And that's because at the end of the day, while the challenger brands get all the attention and they get all the fun and they get all the headlines at conferences like these, really what we are all about, what I'm trying to understand in all these interviews that I do, is the top right-hand quadrant of this graph. If, to oversimplify, growth in a category is a race between challenger brands that are trying to get to scale and incumbent brands that are trying to innovate and not get left behind, we want to understand how the challenger brands scale, but also how the incumbent brands innovate, because there's actually something to be learned from both sides. And actually, one of the most interesting things about probably the 150 interviews, it's been 100 challenger brands and 50 incumbent brands. So it is skewed towards the challengers, but one of the most interesting things about having all these conversations is actually seeing the contrast between what challenger brands do differently from incumbent brands and drawing insights from that. Okay. Apologies for the font translation going from Google Drive to PowerPoint, but hopefully you can still read that. What we're going to go through today, 5 principles of challenger brands. That's kind of a culmination of the last 5-6 years of research that I've done and that Rival has done. We're going to go through 2 case studies for each that come from interviews that we've done. You will see QR codes throughout this presentation. If you're interested in hearing the interviews from the brands that I mentioned, or of course any of the other 150 that we actually have, you can follow those QR codes and go to check it out. I'm going to try to give you, I always think with conversations like this, with talks like this, conferences like this, you're going to hear so much stuff. What I hope for is that some of you, because I can't hope for all of you, are going to take at least one thing out of this presentation that you're actually going to go do differently. So for each of the principles and each of the case studies, I'm going to give you the key takeaway, and I'm going to wrap it up at the end. And that is my hope, is that people walk out of here and actually do something differently based on what we talk about today. Okay, so the challenger playbook, as we call it, which again comes from what we see challenger brands doing to scale, but also incumbent brands to innovate. It really comes down to 5 things, and I'm assuming these principles are going to get talked about in a lot of different conversations at this conference. They're probably words that you're familiar with, but hopefully showing it to you in action and showing it to you with how it all fits together is going to give you an interesting insight and, again, a takeaway that you can actually apply to your own business. So the core is going to be differentiation, and I'm not going to go through each of these on this slide because we'll do it on the next few slides where we have the case studies. But the core is differentiation, really standing for something different, being preferred. After that is relevance. How do you actually appeal to what people care about? Then, of course, it's talkability. A lot of the conversations that are going to be had over the course of the next few days, I'm sure. Arbitrage, which I actually think in the conversations around challenger brands doesn't get talked about enough. I think that there's a general attraction or pull, to be honest, within this industry, to talk more about the brand side of things, the comms side of things, the creativity side of things. And actually, what I've seen is that, yes, there are a lot of challenger brands that are exceptional at those things, and that is what's driving their growth. But actually, there's a whole set of challenger brands that are focused much more on the arbitrage and the iteration, more of the quant side of this industry. And of course, at the end of the day, the whole debate about marketing being more of an art or a science, of course, it's both. It depends on how you can actually put those two things together. All right. Let's start with differentiation. So differentiation is at the core. At the end of the day, if your brand cannot stand out in a way that's going to make it preferred, you're not going to drive differentiated behavior around preference or purchase. That's really what it comes down to. You can't prefer something if it's the same to everything else. A lot of what we see with incumbents, and also, let's be honest, oftentimes on the B2B side of the industry or on the tech side of the industry, is a focus on what do I want my brand to be that's relevant to the audience that I'm speaking to, and that my product actually does to help them. But actually, the third variable that I would argue should get a lot more time and attention and should really be the load-bearing structure of how you think about positioning and brand strategy should be differentiation. How do we actually stand out? How do we challenge the convention of the category that we exist within? One of the things that we do as Rival when we're working with our clients going through brand strategy and positioning exercises, we actually start with mapping the category convention, the playbook of the incumbents within the category to know what not to do. Couple examples here. I'm guessing you all have heard of both of these brands. I'm actually interviewing Susan, who's the co-founder and chief brand officer at Here We Flow tomorrow. One of my favorites, actually. And we had Tom Rainsford, who's the CMO of Beavertown, on the podcast. Again, you can link to the podcast through the QR codes if you're interested in hearing the full conversation. The thing that I love about Here We Flow, there's a lot of things that I love about Here We Flow, but again, a lot of the conversations in this industry and at conferences like these focus on the positioning and the promotion, the 2 Ps of the 4 Ps that actually go into marketing. And actually, where they started, they do a lot of great advertising and a lot of great marketing, but where they started was actually with the product. So they sell feminine hygiene, sexual wellness products. This is their kind of hero SKU, their tampons. The 2 co-founders walked into the supermarket, they walked down the aisle and they said, why are all tampons sold in the same box? What if we took a Ben & Jerry's container and we sold our tampons in that? Functionally, it's not any different, but it makes you stand out. Beavertown, of course, I think probably one of the hero challenger brands from the London area. The thing that I love about them, and I think really speaks to if you took your logo off, 5 minutes? I thought it was 20. Is it not 20 minutes? Sorry. 5 minutes left. Okay, my bad. I thought it was 20 minutes. I'm gonna have to speed up. If you took the Beavertown logo off of any of the advertising that they did, it could not be any other beer brands. Relevance. So the brands that are seen as more culturally relevant grow 2.5 times the category average. This has always been the case. However, now, culture has been fragmented in the same way that society has, in the same way that media has. So what we see, many of you probably know Paddle. You know Paddle, but you also know Blank Street Coffee. What we see from challenger brands is that they are able to tap into the trends in culture, the micro communities within culture that other brands are not participating in, or at least not at the scale that they are. So Paddle, obviously very popular here, as well as pickleball in my home country of America. And so Blank Street Coffee did a tie-up with Paddle, but also recognized that matcha was a trend within coffee and tea consumption that was really on the rise. And so they did a collab between Paddle and matcha. There's some amazing stat about the sales that it actually drew. You can actually look it up, and you can check out more of what they've done with that QR code. B2C brands get a lot of the love, but let's give some love to some of our B2B friends. Paddle is a unicorn B2B fintech company. What they've done is literally created a Netflix-style media hub around their product. So they do short films, they do interviews, of course they do podcasts, but they've basically created this whole culture that taps into the microcultures around their audience and gives them content that actually adds relevant but differentiated value. A couple others, talkability, how do you actually do things and show up in a way that's going to get people to talk about your brands? Peanut, if you haven't come across them, you should definitely check them out. We had them present at our most recent Rival Sessions event, our kind of meetup for challenger marketers here in London. They've done a couple amazing campaigns. Definitely go read up on them. What I will say is they are doing it with 2 people in the whole marketing team. So we want to talk about Outsized Impact. How is a company with only 2 people in their marketing team delivering hit after hit of these advertising campaigns? Next, a company out of Montreal, Midday Squares, a chocolate company. They actually do no marketing. Instead, what they did is they created a reality TV show about what it's like to start a company. And that has gotten them listed in a bunch of the retailers in Canada, as well as Costco in the US. Again, with no traditional marketing. Number 4, arbitrage. There is something to the whole stock market of attention concept. Where is there underpriced attention on different media channels? But actually, what I wanted to call out, and what I see these challenger brands doing really well, is that they are showing up in channels and in ways and in communities that helps to give them outsized impact, that helps them to appear bigger than they actually are. We did a bit of research that talked about this concept of the pufferfish challenger brands can puff them up to seem much bigger than the budget or the scale that they actually have. This is what we're talking about. Yonder, really clever media placement by their challenger credit card company. They bought all of their media placement right next to Amex ads, helped to amplify the message of what they were doing. Yeti, they have, I think it's a team of 15 marketing people. Only 2 of them are responsible for the brand of Yeti. The rest of them own specific communities. So you have a head of marketing for hunting, a head of marketing for fishing, a head of marketing for camping. And then lastly, iteration. There is, and I would break this down into the 1% improvements. What are the little things that you can do better, the kind of Kaizen mentality over time, but also the 10x ideas. I'm going to be interviewing Charlotte, who's the brilliant CMO of Bloom & Wild later today, if you want to check that out. So I will call out Burger King, obviously not a typical challenger brands, but if you remember the Moldy Whopper campaign and all of those hits that they had over the last 10 years that kind of helped to make the brand cool again, what they did to get to 10x ideas is they consolidated a budget globally under Fernando Machado, the CMO, and said any agency or any individual could pitch for that budget. So they completely steamrolled the traditional agency sandbox mechanic to be able to get these 10x ideas from any of the people that were connected to their business. Okay, I think I'm supposed to be wrapping up, but I'm just going to keep going until, yeah. All right, so takeaways and actions. So there's the 5 here. Again, you can check this out, take it away with you. I think the thing that I would say to maybe wrap it up is, I was trying to think about this coming down here today because, again, my biggest fear doing things like this is that people are going to walk out of here and not do anything differently, and or you're like, yeah, I've heard all this stuff before, and it's not actually differentiated. So my point of differentiation being at the core of challenger brands, I want Rival to be a challenger brand. I want to be differentiated in how we stand out. So if I have to take a step back and actually think about all this stuff, the 150 conversations, the 40 CMO roundtables that we've done, obviously the clients that we've worked with, really my whole career in a way, what is the one thing that I would say for you all to do differently? Hopefully some of these resonate with you, and you can take them and apply them within what you're already doing. But I would actually say the one thing, there is something to customer centricity, which I know is a bit of a cliche buzzword. And whenever any of my guests bring that up, I'm always like, okay, but what are you actually doing differently about it? But if I had to say, like, what is the one thing that these challenger brands are doing that is allowing them to grow faster than incumbents within their category, or incumbents and allowing them to innovate, it would be that they have a differentiated understanding of the customer needs, and then they focus their time and their budget on how do they solve them in a differentiated way. But what I was going to say, because that probably is something that you've heard before, is that the thing that I would take out that I think could actually be the most helpful for people in this room is it's been amazing. Not every single conversation, but at least half of them how many of these CMOs have what I would call a structured approach to innovation? So if, I would argue, all growth at the end of the day comes from innovation around revenue-generating opportunities that deliver against customer needs in a differentiated way, you need the customer centricity piece, but you also need some system, some culture, but also some process that enables you to innovate consistently. I think a lot of companies leave that up to, not chance, but they kind of assume that it's going to happen. Or maybe they have, if you're a bigger company, maybe you've got an R&D team off to the side. But what I heard most consistently, the thing that stood out the most for me, and I actually think is the easiest thing for people to walk out of here and apply, is that if you do not have a structured system for innovation, could be a 70-20-10 model, it could be an OKR that you set for your team, it could be a 30-minute meeting where you just get people to give you ideas for 1% improvements and 10x ideas. Some type of structured system for innovation is the thing that I think is both the most differentiated thing that I draw out of these conversations and the thing that's easiest for people to take out of this room and apply. Okay, I'm out of time, I think. Thank you so much. If you want to continue the conversation, check out more of the content. You can find us here. You can find me around for the next couple of days. Back to you.